Cool.
Right. Hello, everybody. Again, thank you very much for joining. Before we jump into the agenda, just wanted to say that I'm super excited and very much appreciative of everyone coming together here with the shared goal to accelerate Interop. I think it sends a really strong signal that we are all here coming to the table to solve one of the most valuable things we can for users within the entire Ethereum ecosystem. Um, yeah, I think we probably all agree that there is urgency here. Some of the primary things that we should probably not lose track of in my mind, I just wanted to start with here, which number one to me is what problem are we solving? And yeah, nod to Mark from Optimism for really drilling this and many others for making sure that we stay focused on this. And I would really ask for the whole group here to, as we go forward this call and future calls, to make sure we don't lose track of that. And then number two, I think just as important in my mind is maintaining momentum and forward progress towards the solution. We need to make sure that we land at the right solution here, but also think there is a potential failure case, I guess, where we get bogged down in technical debate. And so this to me is sort of one of the trickier aspects of this whole endeavor to balance. And again, yeah, just would ask that we try not to lose track of the urgency here as we evaluate what are the things that we really need to have, where should we invest more time, and what things are potentially okay to come back to later. I definitely don't have all the answers, but I think we can all try to keep the group on track to our goals as we get into these discussions. If anyone else has anything to add there, yeah, feel free to jump in now. Or one other thing I was going to say, just in terms of yeah, sort of housekeeping, let's try to do. We do have a pretty good number of people here, so let's try to do the old raised hand thing. Anyone else have anything that they want to add? Cool. All right. So yeah, we can jump into first part of the agenda, which is chain specific addresses. I was going to start with just a very quick 2 minute refresher and overview for anyone who may have forgotten or just isn't fully up to speed with things. So let me share my screen. I'll keep this short and sweet. If this works. Okay. Can you all see my screen here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, just again, just as a really quick overview, original ERC is 3770 back in 2021, drawing inspiration from that for 7828, which is the ENS-based version. Summarizing it here below, this is a unified address format that allows specifying the account as well as the chain on which that account intends to transact. The goals, again, let's not lose track of that. Automatic handling of cross L2 sends just by putting the correct address into the send field. What are other must-haves of this design? Supporting all chains in the Ethereum ecosystem. This includes non-EVM. It does not include Alt L1s. It does not include things that are clearly and it does not include things that are yeah, sorry, just clearly outside of the Ethereum ecosystem. What are we optimizing for? Human readability and intuitiveness, and a scalable solution that supports the continued rapid growth of the L2, L3 ecosystem by moving chain registration to ENS. If, any questions or anything at any point, feel free just to raise your hand. Okay, but what exactly will this look like? Short answer is TBD. We have some candidates, as you can see here on the screen. This can be something like alice.eth at rollup.eth. There's alternatives. I think from discussions that we've had leading up to this point, many, there's sort of, yeah, varying degrees of passion or preference for each of these. I think perhaps more and more of us are sort of coming to the conclusion that that any of these would would solve the problem that we're looking to solve, and that I think we could probably get comfortable moving forward with either of these. In my mind, I do have a preference for something that, again, like, I think is a bit more human readable and intuitive, which is the top solution here with the @ But hopefully we don't get too bogged down on this question either. Okay. Last thing, open questions here. Finalizing the format, there's a sort of a bucket of questions around the rollout of on-chain configs, which is 7785. We haven't really touched on that. And then compatibility with Kite. And this may be one of the sort of more tricky things for us to answer, at least on this call. But we've had some initial discussions around that, and I wanted to actually, hand it off here to some other folks who have been thinking about this. Maybe Marcin, if you're available.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So yeah, we had a bunch of discussion about how this could be how this could be compatible with Kype. It's of course still being analyzed, discussed, but the early idea is to have one Kype like prefix ecosystem, and then everything underneath being compatible with the ERC that Joshua was just showing, right? So currently, for those who don't know, Kype is the chain agnostic protocol. Today, you can reach Ethereum chains by doing a very human unfriendly EIP 155 colon chain ID colon address. So this probably will keep working, and the discussion is to potentially add a new Kype entry somewhere in there that will have, for example, this ERC that was just shown. But one thing I would add to the group is I very much support the urgency that Joshua was talking about, and I would love for us to even agree on the small steps, right? If we as a community can come and like at least agree that, okay, this will be the chain format, this will, I hope, mentally unblock people to be like, okay, now that we have the chain addressing solved, we can talk more about interop and messaging and like next layers.
Any other thoughts on this question of compatibility with Kite?
What is the benefit of using Kype for this format?
So in this case, we would, I mean, what will be shown in the later things, there are a bunch of wallets, whatnot, that are already using Kype. The way to think about it is, Kype here will be almost like a fixed prefix, and then everything underneath will be, for example, this ERC that Josh was showing, right? But this means that you'll still be able to like distinguish it from, I don't know, Solana addresses globally.
Yeah, I just want to add, like, without going into the details of like this proposition of how to integrate with Kype, I think it's a good idea to be Kype compatible, because eventually other blockchains also have addresses and things like that. So other ones and other ecosystems. So something that is open for one implementation by wallets just has a larger chance of being more easily adopted in wallets. So I see the value there.
London?
Yeah, and coming from the wallet perspective, I think, I think when you have a sort of multi-chain wallet with different ecosystems, it's helpful to have some kind of addressing there across those. But I just want to clarify that, from the wallet side, if we were to basically the use of the CAPE standards are mostly for like low level routing and all of that, but in the interface, we would definitely be able to translate that to another format and present that differently to users so that it's in an optimal kind of human friendly format.
Any other questions around this question of compatibility or more broadly on chain-specific addresses? There's a few questions in the chat. Let's see. So yes, this is depending on ENS, but I think there's a solution here where we can support non-EVM L2s. Maybe someone who has been thinking more deeply about this can. Oh, actually, we have Raul. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm representing Aztec, which is not an EVML2. Yeah, my question was like, it's unclear how exactly I could even help with Kype or this integration.
Andreas?
Thank you. If you want to talk about interoperability, that's chain agnostic, and that is based where that allows you to use any type of keys and refer to different types of origins, like chains. Why not use DIDs? It's a ready-made standard. It's already adopted. That's what's going to be used we'll make it going to be used in regulatory context, especially in the EU integrates with authentication frameworks like that enterprises are using, OAuth 2, OpenID Connect. So, and it's easily extensible for what we're trying to achieve here. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, sorry, maybe I missed the first part. What you're proposing that we use which instead?
DIDs.
Got it. Yeah, let's come back to that. So there's another raised hand. I guess maybe circling back to this question around ENS and non-EVM L2s, I would like someone from actually ENS to chime in, because I think there's a more comprehensive explanation, sort of vision here. I see Eskinder is here. Are you available to jump in?
Yeah, I didn't get to work directly on this, so I don't think I could speak to it to the same degree as Jeff, who worked directly on the standard. But I would say is like non-EVM chains, broadly speaking, like ENS is building towards that support. And one of the goals, for us broadly with name chain is to be able to, handle for non-EVMs. So I don't see this as a permanent kind of like blocker, but something to build towards, and having this interface today, I think will make it easier down the line.
Thanks. Yes, Kalman?
So there's 7828, but there's also 7785 for the chain ID ERCs. And this also proposes making the hashes 256 bit long in the long term, and making the chain IDs hashes. And this would allow multiple ENS so that a single ENS contract is not fully enshrined. And it has similar great properties.
Yep, exactly. And this would rely on that first.
Have any wallets chimed in here? Because it seems like this is about how accounts and addresses are expressed in wallets and shown to the user. So I'm curious if any have already expressed support or any kind of concern.
Any of the wallet teams want to jump in here?
Yeah, so I'm representing Fireblocks, an institutional wallet side. I don't have, like I mentioned earlier, the Kype orientation is interesting. Like again, I don't have a specific opinion on the suggestion because it's the first time I've seen it, but that's just something that I mentioned. Using DIDs is definitely like a different direction. I'm not sure if it's something that is like, I'm not sure what is the practical suggestion for DIDs, but DIDs are very interesting from like the wallet standard space, I'll have to say. But again, like I don't want to derail that conversation if like it's not a clear direction.
I can chime in from Phantom. We use DIP internally. It's very useful, not just for addresses, but to express, to identify different resources. So that probably won't change. But as has been stated here and in the chat, it's not human readable, so we don't show that to users at all. Adopting some other standard for addresses would be great, and we are open to the idea of adopting some other standard.
Yeah, from the MetaMask side, yeah, we're planning to, or we're already using some Cape standards in our wallet, and have kind of weighed in on that a bit to see if we can make that easier on the Ethereum side. And again, I think when it comes to displaying to the user, I think there's a lot more flexibility to translate anything that's kind of at the protocol level to be displayed differently. And that's where we're looking for, also some standards in the industry.
And maybe it's worth adding that a lot of the conversation between wallets actually happens on the Kypes level, right? Because so like a lot of the times us and MetaMask would meet is in the Kype Wallet Connect setup. So I think that's like a important aspect to mention, that our conversation is a lot of times happening on that level of how do we support something that is across all chains to improve user experience.
Cool. Anything else on this chain-specific address question and DIDs, which is something that's actually, yeah, I'm not super familiar with. Hudson?
Yeah, I just had a question. If anyone from ENS was here, someone in the chat, I think Mohammed asked, like, is the ENS governance process, would that theoretically be involved if this ERC goes through? Or if there's anyone who just might know in general?
Yeah, the ENS governance should have no impact on this. The name can't be like revoked from ownership. So I think it comes down to like, what is the ownership structure and how is that secured versus like the DAO being able to like kind of snatch back a name. That's not something that's possible today. Additional context on this is we're actually rebuilding the ENS like core protocol from scratch for the name chain rollout. So we're going to be going through kind of like a migration. So there will be like a whole new suite of audits and everything. So everybody should be able to see kind of like the result of those audits and get additional confirmation on like the security of name ownership.
Got it. Okay, so this is more, the standard will be like very well integrated into the like name chain that's being built from scratch. So that's actually like, we're not giving fees to ENS as we're doing these names and stuff like that. It's a standard being applied, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like one of the things that's really nice about this for ENS is we have to serve all of the L2s. And right now the lack of standardization around this is obviously like a barrier for us to be able to do that. So I think this would help from that point as well.
Thanks.
Yep, Mark. Did you freeze, Mark?
Just wondering if anyone has started prototyping this at all?
Not that I'm aware of.
Hey, sorry, just wondering if anybody has started prototyping this at all.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Is Mark lagging for anyone else, or is that just on my side? Okay, cool.
I heard it twice.
Yeah, sorry, Mark, you're lagging a little bit, but we heard your question. Yeah, I don't think anyone has gotten to the implementation.
Cool. I think, is anybody here interested in trying to prototype this? Because I think that we'd learn a lot from that, and it's like in the bottleneck for getting this into production.
Yeah, the ENS team obviously down to help prototype this. I think what's more impactful would be like getting some commitments from the L2s to try and help get their feedback and like actually put something together to see how it looks. But we're definitely down to help with that.
We should clarify a little bit more. What do you want to prototype? Because on one side, what we're trying to agree is how we're going to name things, and then the best application would be, I guess, somewhere in wallets probably, where you could actually use a wallet and that will resolve it, and based on this, we'll go to one L2 or the other.
I would imagine a library that can just take a name and then resolve it correctly.
So just to get on that, I think it's both a question at the L2 level for the support, but also at the wallet level, because imagine if you enter that into the send field, and the wallet itself doesn't support the L2, will your tokens just disappear? For users, that can be very tricky to understand.
I think one important question is if we want the address resolution to be on-chain verifiable or not, because it might be easy to make that service that Mark mentioned as the off-chain service, but to make it on-chain verifiable on every L2 is a different story.
Yeah, Vitalik replied in the chat that this should be a requirement. I think that was sort of what we've been operating under, but
Right. I think one of the longer term goals here should be to move toward a world where it's possible to have a universal L2 client where, as a wallet, you can write one piece of code once, and then every compliant L2 should be able to just it should be able to interpret every compliant L2 automatically using config contracts and whatever other machinery we figure out over time.
So
in
it
that
sounds
case,
like, go ahead, sorry.
I think you go for it, Eskinder.
Yeah, I was just gonna see if there was more consensus around people making a commitment to try to prototype something. Sounds like MetaMask would be interested, ENS interested. Maybe if we had 2 or 3 L2s who wanted to maybe have a smaller working group, that could be a really useful way for us to kind of continue this.
I can talk for the Status Network. I think would be interested in collaborating on that. For Status Wallets, I need to check up with the guys to see if this is something that they can integrate in their pipeline. But I know that they have been working on that for a while. So I think if we come up with an actual good way to do it, they will be more than happy to prioritize that versus whatever effort they're doing at the moment.
All right, awesome. Anyone else interested?
Sure, happy to help from ZK Sync. Hopefully you'll not need too much from us, but...
Yeah, I don't think it will be heavy. I think it's more just proving it out, right?
I'm also down from OP Labs.
Amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, this is great. Thanks, Iskander, for pushing on this. Yeah, so maybe what we can do after the call, or if anyone wants to spin up a group, I can spin one up, have a chain address implementers group, and yeah, get going on that for anyone that wants to jump in. Andreas?
Yeah, so what do you do with when you have like with the R1 curve? So how do you support then multiple different curves? I mean, if you have that already implemented at the L2 level and people are using it, then you're locking them out of the of that interop. So I think one of the key characteristics is must be key agnostic.
Yeah, again, I think like long-term, this stuff should be designed around account abstraction anyway. I mean,
Cool. We have a few people with hands up, just trying to be mindful of time. We do want to get to the second agenda item, so maybe we'll try to get through the hands that are up and then move over to the second topic. Mohammed?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand from a roll-up perspective or like a chain who wants to support this standard. Do we have any idea or like rough proposal how that should be like the on-chain verification? Like, are we expecting to deploy a system, a smart contract, or pre-compile that gets the like address and return the result of the resolution or verify something like that? Or do we still have to figure that out together?
It's a good question. Vitalik or anyone else have thoughts here? We can also, maybe this is something that we need to iterate on in the implementers group, prototypers group. So maybe we come back to this.
Give us a while to figure it out. There are a bunch of technical details in there. So
okay. Frangio?
Yeah, this might be a technical detail to figure out later, but I get the feeling that there isn't a consensus on the way that on-chain config is going to happen. The ERCs are using ENS records, but then Vitalik in the chat also talked about config contracts, and they seem to be mutually exclusive. So is any one of these the true way that there is consensus, or is there still something we're figuring out?
Yeah, my understanding at least is that we are moving forward with the on-chain config ERC. I have the number in front of me right now, but that's how we're moving forward. Some things can still be in flux, but yes, 7785. That's my understanding.
Okay, so ENS records.
Correct.
Yeah, I have one question on this is how we ensure that the ENS record are evaluated the same way in the different chain. We ensure that there is some consistency across chain.
Yeah, I think it's another good question. If anyone else has anything to chime in, but maybe this is something else that we can come back to. I am collecting these questions and promise we will get back to these. If it's okay with the group, maybe we can move forward to the second topic, which is the collection of cross-chain messaging ERCs we have. And we have a few groups here today that are going to share thoughts and perspectives on that. Would any of those groups anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first.
Thanks, Ellie.
Could I share my screen? It's okay if not, but looks like sharing is not turned on.
Yeah, sorry, should be fixed now.
Okay, 1 second. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Oh, okay. Sorry. And now it's like I can't see my own screen. All right, there we go. Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna run through what I think is best for us to do. So I think that we should have general message passing. So we're talking about cross-chain interoperability, and we should have a general message passing interface, and this is what we should work to standardize in this group. So the reason I think this is that message passing is the core primitive for all of our interop things that we want to do. So like if we want to do cross-chain function calls, at its core, that involves passing a message from one chain to another. Same thing with intents or bridges, they all at their core require message passing. And I would like to say that the message passing interface is different from the protocol. There probably will be a lot of message passing protocols out there that chains use, but they should all form to the same interface so that devs can move across chains and deploy apps across chains without needing to change their code or understand the underlying message passing protocol. So yes, I think that we should focus like very, very general and low level at first. On just the message passing before we kind of get into more specific things. I think we can build all of the more specific things on top as like sub protocols or sub interfaces of a general message passing interface. And so these are the requirements that I feel strongly that such a standard should have. It shouldn't require any VM changes. It should be VM agnostic and proof agnostic. Specifically, the proof agnosticism also helps with synchronous composability, but it should support all kinds of interop, like synchronous and asynchronous, like native interop that's like integrated with the chain's state transition function itself versus, outside interop. It should be unopinionated about apps built on top of it and also about protocols deployed below it. And it should be have an easy API to use for devs, because that's kind of the whole point of this interface is to like make the life easier for application developers to send messages. And luckily, this is what most of us are building anyway. Like this is pretty much what a lot of the ERCs that are listed out there, this is exactly what they're building in some form or another. And from my standpoint, so I worked on an ERC 7841, but from my standpoint, I really don't care like which one we adopt, so long as it meets those requirements and can be a general protocol that any chain can use and any application can use for what it needs. Like totally, I really, really don't care if it's the one I worked on. So here's what I think that we should do. One, we should agree on these requirements. And I think that's like the first place to start. Do we all agree on this? Are there any other requirements we think that we should add? With the context that we should keep it very low level and general and not application specific. Then I think two, we should agree on a message format. This is like the common foundation that almost all of the ERCs have is they have some sort of a message format. And then we can agree on the APIs. So I think the APIs to send and receive messages are where the ERCs differ the most. And so I think that maybe that can be like the last thing that we tackle. And so brief overview, so I worked on this ERC 7841. The status of it now is that we are planning to kind of add a chunk to 7786 from Axelar and Open Zeppelin, and basically add a chunk in their ERC that kind of covers the use cases that this ERC does. But the reason I just wanted to bring this up is that this message type, so this message type is very similar across like all of these ERCs. It has some sort of a sender key, sender chain ID, receiver key, destination chain ID, payload, and then maybe some extra metadata. So like in this ERC, we have a nonce and a session ID. For example, in 7786, you could use attributes to put that information in, but like this is fundamentally like what all of these message standards need. So if we can agree on this is like a really, really good first step. And so I think the one thing that maybe slightly differs from the other ERCs in my perspective, but it's just my opinion, I view cross-chain function calls as something you build on top of message passing. So I don't think the interface necessarily has to tell chains how they need to do cross-chain function calls. But I'm open to discussion about that because I think all of the other ERCs are specific around like actually executing a function across chain. But anyway, yeah, that's it. So going back to these requirements, these are the requirements I think that we need for such an interface. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Martin?
Yeah, I agree. And the lower level interface, the simpler interface, the higher odds we can actually agree, and then we can have another round of discussions of building on top of that, right? Up to the level where, as you were showing there, Ellie, the level where like, hey, maybe we can even trim some of these downs. There are the questions like, hey, you should even have a destination chain, or should be more like a broadcast style thing, et cetera, et cetera. So like the simpler it is, the higher the odds of agreeing, so that then we can shill our ERCs kind of on top of something rather than on top of nothing.
Yeah.
What are the chunks you're planning on adding to 7786 that are not already covered, out of curiosity?
Yeah, so it is a way, I don't know if you're familiar with 7786. Also, I know Open Zeppelin is also on that call. They have attributes to specify metadata that you need. And so one of the use cases that we wanted to make sure was supported was these more complex use cases where you might actually want to send multiple messages back and forth between chains. And use cases where maybe you have like a message that you want to broadcast and you want to allow multiple applications to be able to read it. So we're going to add a chunk where that kind of specifies like how you could use these attributes to do that within the 7786, which previously it would have been very difficult to do those use cases.
Rangio?
Yeah, so maybe I can now talk about 7786 and where that comes from and some of the problems that we see and that we have tried to address. So we have been, some of us have been working on this ERC. Initially, Open Zeppelin and Axelar have been collaborating on it and co-designing it. We at Open Zeppelin, we had looked into the cross-chain problem space like 3 years ago and found it to be very fragmented. Like we had really simple things we wanted to do back then, like say write ERC20 source code that a project would be able to deploy on multiple chains, let's say Arbitrum and Optimism, and make it bridgeable from the L1. And in order to do that, you need to write different code. And that just increases the level of effort that you need to make, the level of the number, like the lines of code that you need to audit and so on. So that really slowed down the thing and eventually actually even put the brakes on what we were doing, because we had to implement different logic for each of those chains and choose which chains to support and so on. So that particular problem with tokens, now I'm happy to see that it's being addressed with 7802, which is this standard for bridgeable tokens. But I totally agree with Ellie that we need to go below that and standardize as well the low-level primitive of cross-chain message passing. And so this is the scope of 7786. It's just a very simple interface for sending messages from one chain and receiving them on the other chain. So this allows teams like Open Zeppelin or anyone building libraries, tools, or infrastructure to build on that instead of having to individually integrate each chain or each provider that there is. And on the side of the users, there can also end up being sort of a vendor lock-in situation if they decide to use a particular protocol as an abstraction layer. And we think the best outcome for users is to have these vendor agnostic solutions that they can use. So that's where 7786 comes in, and some of the motivations. And so the problems that we are solving for are, we want this ERC to be able to cover every chain and protocol that has cross-chain messaging, general message passing as a feature. And so for that, we have tried to make it a very minimal spec, like Martin just said, to make it very easy to adopt, to reduce the effort required to implement it. We've also tried to make it, we've actually made it extensible so that any feature that falls out of this minimal core that is in the standard can be implemented on top of it in a way that, you know, it's sort of forward compatible for it. And this can be used by protocols that have very specific features they want to expose, but it can also be used over time to evolve it as we find new things that we want to standardize across the space. But always aiming to have a core of shared functionality that will work everywhere where 7786 is implemented. Another thing that we thought of and tried to do is to make it fully compatible with non-EVM chains. This is a particular place where previous efforts fell short. And so for that, we've chosen KYPE 10 account IDs, which came up before in this call. And yeah, so we've also been reaching out and working out with many of you here in this call to check that the interface that we have does cover all of the scenarios and use cases that we're, you know, each of us is interested in, and iterating on things that we find need to be improved. So we're still in this process. Like Ellie said before, we've been collaborating on that and have some changes in the pipeline to improve support for synchronous composability. We've also been thinking about bundles together with the base team. And those are two things that are happening. And we've also talked with ZK Sync about supporting native authentication. We can go into that detail later, but it's something that I think the rollups in particular that are in this call would be interested in. And lastly, let me say one thing that we left out of scope initially is the issue of gas and fee payment, which, and by extension, that sort of implies relaying. And it's not because this isn't important, but it is a place where there's a lot more diversity across protocols, and it requires more work to come to some universal solution. But it looks like something we may want to focus on next. So this is the brain dump.
Thanks, Franjo. This is great. Cool. We do have two more groups that still want to get to. Maybe we can start with Hyperlane or jump in.
Happy to. Let me just quickly figure out how to share my screen. It's been a while since I've used Zoom. Share. There you go. Oh no, I didn't approve the update for Zoom, so I have to restart. Actually, maybe somebody else can go first, and then I will come back.
If it's macOS, you don't really need to restart, I think. It just shows you the error. Try.
We'll troubleshoot if anyone from Wonderland wants to jump in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys. So we have a few proposals that we sent. I guess the first one and the one that you probably know about is the let's say the cross-chain mint and burn standard. So this is just let's say a simple clarification on the function signatures that bridges should be calling, just for it to make it simpler for developers to not have to overload the already used mint and burn functions with extra logic that handles, let's say, the specificity of cross-chain minting. That's just it. So that's just that ERC. It's very, very simple, and the way basically it's, let's say, backwards compatible. You can use wrappers, you can have bridges, basically translate from the cross-chain mint to the actual internal mint, in the case for XERC20 or other tokens, and that's it. Then we're proposing two different primitives. One is the separation between validation of messages and execution of messages, which we think is very, very important. This is something that I've seen people talk about on the chat as well, and as Eli as well mentioned, and I think Marcin as well, is there is a kind of a very important thing that we need to first define, which is, okay, how do we validate messages and what information do we need for that? Both from the sending side and from the receiving side. I think Marcin also said, like, hey, a message is just something that you broadcast, right? Then on the other end, on the receiving end, you're choosing to prove that a specific message is valid. And with that validation, then you can either execute or you can use that message as whatever, correct? It doesn't necessarily need to be tied or have an execution engine enshrined into the messaging layer. And then the other thing that we are proposing is the kind of an entry point primitive, which is essentially a wrapper contract on top of the messaging execution that allows developers to enforce specific logic for those messages to be triggered. This is very important for two reasons. So you can say, hey, why don't you literally just, instead of pointing to your final recipient, point to an intermediate recipient that does this extra logic? That would work, but for some more complex cases, you actually need the execution messaging contract to be the one doing the actual calls. In the case, for example, for say cross-chain ERC20s, you actually need the messaging protocol to be calling the cross-chain mint or the cross-chain burn, because that's the agent that is allowed to call those specific functions. And if you want to add any, let's say, logic on top, for example, do a multi-send, then most of the protocols that we have right now don't really have logic to handle this, and they shouldn't, which is fine. Some of them have some sort of logic to handle like very, very specific cases, but we should enable developers and users to use kind of these wrapped versions of specific enshrined logic outside of the messaging protocol layer. The good thing about this is that these contracts should be agnostic, because they just basically use the same APIs that we are trying to agree on, and they should also be, let's say, they should live on multiple chains as well, since they're just vanilla contracts. So it should be very easy to use those, let's say, across chain without needing to kind of re-implement them and redeploy them for every specific chain.
Should I go?
Yep. Any questions for Skelly? Otherwise, yeah, we can. You're good to go.
Any questions? I didn't mean to jump the questions.
I think all good.
All right. So I hope everybody can see my screen. I just quickly copied Ellie's slides because I thought they were pretty nice. And yes, I think I personally, sorry, now from Hyperlane, I personally agree. Like these are like very important requirements, I think, for any message passing interface that this group standardizes to kind of have at the base. But I think one thing that I would like to kind of put, I guess, the focus on is specifically these 2 points. So I guess one way that like I think you'll see that like we've been here writing at Hyperlane 7854 is maybe very different, right? Is that it's an interface that already exists and has already been running in production for the last couple of years. And one of the reasons why I think that is something to consider is because developers who will build these message passing interface will always consider the like alternative, right? Which is basically like using a specific protocol that has presumably like either some advantages in terms of like time to market with tooling and with just like general kind of awareness or like tool stacks built on top. Like I think all the things that we said, intents, liquidity, tokens. And in that regard, the ERC that we've proposed is, I think, very different, but I think it's like a very key, I guess, consideration, I think, for this group. Like sometimes I feel that similar way about like rollup bridges, right? Where like developers could have been using rollup bridges to send messages between L1 and L2 and vice versa. But because the developer experience has been pretty rough, that is kind of like part of the reason why people even use like other specifically Interop protocols that have very different like trust assumptions. And so one thing that I wanted to kind of like, put, I guess, as context is that like we as Hyperlane have always believed that like the message passing interface has to be like, standardized and fully open. And that's been true for Hyperlane basically since the beginning of when we started, right? And so the interface that we've specified in 784 is fully open source, but I think comes with the benefit of being basically tested in production, but also having, I think, a set of tooling when it comes to like explorers, when it comes to like token standards, when it comes to like testing frameworks that developers will be able to use. And so I think part of our consideration when choosing a standard very much has to be like, like what are the alternatives for developers to pick? Because I think it's good, obviously, if we agree on a standard, and obviously the less kind of like complexity it has, the more likely we are all to agree upon. But I don't want us to kind of like forget that like we're not doing this in isolation. We're doing this with respect to kind of like alternatives that developers might choose that are maybe not meeting these requirements. And so I think to kind of like aid on that, like the interface as specified in the ERC already has a lot of implementations. And so it's already VM agnostic, right? So like we as Hyperlane, we first implemented the like EVM implementation, but there's already production implementations of like CosmWasm, of the SVM, which is Solana and other SVM-based rollups. There are current implementations for like the Cairo VM, for the Fuel VM, for Cadena, and many others kind of like in progress. And because everything has been open source, like that's been like, I would argue after like IBC and after I think like ChainSafe has had a prior implementation that other people have been able to reuse as well. It is actually currently the like most like open and usable standard if like a new rollup wanted to use interoperability but not pick a vendor. And I think that's really like, I think the key part that, again, I want us to kind of recognize is that like right now we're pitting people against like, hey, use the standard and like build a lot of the tooling yourself, or like basically choose a vendor, right? And I think we obviously have seen that like a lot of an Interop today is very like vendor based. I also want to reiterate, I think the point about the like verification mechanism agnosticism, like I think that's very important, right? Like a lot of folks here on the call are working on like better trust assumptions. Like I think Superchain like is probably the most prominent example of that. And any message passing interface that I think we should standardize should be able to basically encompass and allow developers to use these different verification mechanisms. And on there, I just again want to emphasize that the message interface that our research specifies already has like basically rollup bridge support. It already has like Superchain support and as easily can support others. It has like 6 Helios-like client. And so those are all things that are basically like ready to be used already. And like, yeah, hopefully part of the consideration for this group as to, what to kind of standardize on. And then the last part that I want to mention is relaying, I think, is much more important than maybe we like to recognize. I think I had like a call earlier today with Francisco from Open Zeppelin. And I think it was a great question about like, right, like there's some ERCs like 4626, which actually can basically kind of gain its full value because we just standardize the messaging interface, and there's not that much tooling around it that's necessary. But at least from my personal perspective, relaying actually is a very key developer and user experience for anything that's built on top of the messaging experience, right? Like no user ever wants to like submit transactions on the destination chain. And like if we don't standardize relaying behavior at all, it ends up we're pushing that complexity over to developers or users who like in turn then make this calculus between like, oh, do I go with this kind of like more vendor interoperability protocol or do I choose the standard? So yeah, those are the kind of the like things I want to mention. Again, emphasizing that like, yeah, I think the ERC probably looks a bit weirder because, right, like it is based on the interface that Hyperlane has. But because Hyperlane is fully open source and people have been operating, right, like this interface without our core team at all being involved, I figured it's like worth kind of like at least like having people be aware that this is an option. I recognize that it's a little different from all the other standards. I think that's a good thing, but I can see why people might have some reservations as well.
Thanks, man. Any questions? Feedback?
This is more of a general question, but I think a big difference in the designs of the ERCs is whether they are a pull-based ERC or a push-based ERC. And I think that we either have to support both kinds, or we'll have to decide, which one we think is worth supporting. I guess I just want to point that out.
Arjun?
So we started to have some of this discussion in the chat. Ultimately, like both pull and push-based formats are going to need some standardized messaging interface that is consumed by providers. The question, and this is maybe a good question for Bo, Mark, and Ellie, since you have more familiarity with the pull-based interfaces. The question is, can those be the same interface, or do they have different requirements?
So can the pull-based and the push-based be the same interface? I think this is basically exactly what we were kind of trying to discuss with Open Zeppelin and Axelar, because theirs is a push-based and ours is a pull-based ERC. I think it is difficult to do. I think that there are ways you can do it, but they're kind of really hacky. Like if you have a push-based interface, you could imagine a pull-based protocol by like saying that the push is a no-op and doesn't do anything, and instead you let people pull from it. So I don't know, it's possible, but it's not I don't think there's a very clean way to do it.
I mean, I think technically you could have a pull-based system where the proof request is for a particular message format that's also used in a push-based system. Although I'm not sure if there will be alignment between roll-up ecosystems that use just like any event as like a originating message when they submit this proof request, or if there's going to be alignment around perhaps using like an explicit messaging format that's different or unique from I guess just a regular or any log kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, okay, so one, I do think that the message format can be the same between pull and push based. It's just like the interface and how the APIs work have to be different. And I really like the point that Bo brought up. Personally, I'm kind of opinionated that like even the event style interoperability protocols should like still form to a general message format. That is my opinion.
It is possible to design one interface that just supports both. It's just a question of whether that complexity is worth it, right? Because then like every protocol, every gateway needs to support both. I think there's technical, costs associated with that. So yeah, it's just, if we think it's worth it, it's doable, or we think it's not worth it.
So just going to jump in. I think the benefit here is like, from the perspective of whoever is building L1 blocks, or whoever is like sequencing these transactions, ideally, if you're if you're dealing with a pull-based message packet, relaying a pull-based message package or a push-based message packet shouldn't really make a difference, and all of that should be abstracted away to the interface. And so, like, if there is space for like a hierarchical set of standards such that there is an underlying message format that is shared between both of these, and then it's the interface level that's different, that would, I think, simplify things quite a bit.
I really like that, yeah.
Yeah, definitely +1 to what Arjun said. And I guess it's still, again, it goes back to the differentiation between validation and execution. For push, say style messaging protocols, what you actually have is both the validation and execution happens at the same time. And most of the times you don't necessarily have a way to revalidate the same message that just got executed, right? So if other applications or protocols want to also, let's say, jump on the same train and use the same, let's say, messaging protocol to revalidate a message for other purposes, that's not usually possible. So kind of decoupling that from the design perspective on how like messaging protocols work, it's, I think, a very good first step.
So we are at time. I see there's a hand. Maybe we can get to this quickly and then wrap. CJ?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something really quick. So push-based protocols don't necessarily have to have verification and execution occur at the same time. right? Like the verification can arrive and then sometime later the message can be executed. It like, 7786, which is push-based now, does not take a stance on that, right? And that is why it's possible to actually have a standard that supports push and pull at the same time. So.
Yeah, and then my point is that, in my opinion, a pull-based approach covers like 100% of the use cases because you can build a push based on top of it. But if we're talking about an API for devs, most devs, they're going to want to do a cross-chain function call. That's the use case that they're going to want to use, which is like very suitable to a push-based model.
Skelly, did you have something?
Oh yeah, basically, I guess I agree that what Franjo was saying, which is the push-pull is kind of a loaded term. We either, I mean, from how we've been thinking about things, it's more around validation execution. If you guys want to use another terms and we can agree on other terms to kind of make conversation happen easier, I'm all up for it. But yeah, but I guess we are pretty aligned, and I agree with what CJ was saying as well.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, it does seem like there is some alignment here. We should probably wrap. I hope everyone found this first call helpful. Like I mentioned at the start, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I really appreciate how everyone's coming to the table here. I guess one last thing, maybe it's worth having another breakout group, even just an async Telegram group, for continued discussion around consolidating this message passing interface work. It sounds like some consolidation is already happening with Espresso, Wonderland, basically everyone that's talking here today. So maybe we can keep that up. Yeah, we can keep chatting about that. And yeah, and if there's appetite, I would love to have schedule another follow-up call soon. So let's continue the conversation in chat, and thanks so much. Thanks all. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.